今晩飲みに行きませんか Do you want to go out for a drink tonight? すみません。明日から香港へ出張しなければなりません。I'm sorry, I must go on a business trip to Hong Kong tomorrow. ですから早く帰ります。Therefore, I go home early. So this is a pretty weird conversation in a classical textbook way. Unlike some other examples, the particles are actually fine, but the word choice is quite off. The first sentence, 今晩飲みに行きませんか is totally fine. This is something that your colleague might say. You know, not every Minna no Nihongo sentence sounds weird. Only the ones that do. The problem here is なければなりません which is extremely formal. This is too formal for this kind of conversation between colleagues. You might see なければなりません in writing, but not every kind of writing, a pretty formal kind of writing. The energy here is like politicians speaking at the press conference, very formally, reading a pre-written answer, something like that. And I think the plain Japanese version, なければならない is a little more common because we can sometimes use it in a subordinate clause. And actually came across this example in an anime radio. And here, a voice actor is explaining why she didn't mention that she was playing a character in the anime Needy Streamer Overlord in her Twitter bio.
そうですね。なんか書き始めると、こうなんか、例えばニディガを書いたら、もちろん他の作品も書かなければならないってなった時に、
書けばいいじゃん。
一話のゲストとか、
So なければならない is actually fairly intermediate because we tend to use it in a more complex sentence structure. So this is typical Minna no Nihongo, skipping the basics and jumping into more intermediate expressions. Anyway, a much more common expression would be なきゃいけない have to do something. So maybe you can say something like 明日から香港に出張しなきゃいけないんですよ. I actually have to go on a business trip to Hong Kong tomorrow. But if I have to rewrite the entire sentence, it will be something like 明日から香港に出張なんで早く帰らなきゃいけないんですよ. I'm going on a business trip to Hong Kong tomorrow, so I have to go home early. Or maybe you can simply use 行く to go instead of 出張 business trip and say 明日から香港行くんで早く帰らなきゃいけないんですよ. Or you can just use なんで and say 明日から香港なんで早く帰らなきゃいけないんですよ. Or more colloquially, you can say 帰んなきゃ instead of 帰らなきゃ and say 早く帰んなきゃいけないんですよ. So there's many different ways of naturally phrasing this. And なきゃいけない is a very normal everyday expression and it's perfectly polite if you use it that way. There's really no reason that you can't use なきゃいけない. And when I say something is too formal, sometimes people say, oh, but textbooks are supposed to teach you formal expressions. Then I will say, well, the first line, 今晩飲みに行きませんか isn't really that formal. This is a pretty normal, everyday, casual expression that your colleagues might use. So this dialogue sounds pretty inconsistent, right? So it's like the tone suddenly jumps from coworkers talking to you normally to politicians reading scripts. It's pretty inconsistent. And again, I asked other native speakers to make sure that this is not just my opinion. And their reactions were pretty interesting because they immediately started thinking, oh, how do I say this without sounding too direct or too rude? And they actually say that they wouldn't use なきゃいけない with 出張 business trip and say 出張しなきゃいけない because it sounds like you're emphasizing, oh, I really have to go on a business trip. So the focus shifts from, oh, I'm sorry I have to go, to, oh, I don't like this business trip, which might make sense if you are a boss with ominous eyes complaining about her business trip to Kyoto. But the point of this sentence is not necessarily about the business trip. It's more about, oh, I wish I could, but I have to go home early. So for that reason, they said that they would say, 帰らなきゃいけない, I have to go, instead of 出張しなきゃいけない. I have to go on a business trip. And by saying 帰らなきゃいけない, you can convey the nuance like I wish I could go but I have to go home. And if you remember my example sentence, 明日から香港なんで帰らなきゃいけないんですよ. I actually have to go home early because of the business trip to Hong Kong tomorrow. I instinctively also made that choice. Now this Japanese native speaker said that she wouldn't say 早く帰ります. I go home early. Because it sounds a bit abrupt, like, oh, I go home, bye. And it doesn't really sound like I'm sorry I have to go. Which makes sense to me because if you just say, 早く帰ります, it sounds a bit like you don't really care about like sounding, I'm sorry I have to go. It's more like, oh, 早く帰ります. Oh, I'm gonna go home, bye. I don't care about your drinking kind of thing. And the example sentence that she gave to me was, 今日は早く帰らないといけないんですよ. 明日から香港に出張なんですすみません. And here she used 今日は using は, which conveys like, oh, I couldn't go if it's today, so the timing is bad, which makes sense as a way of politely declining the offer. Now, yet another input that they gave to me is like they could also use といけない instead of なきゃいけない as in 早く帰らないといけないんですよ. I actually have to go home early. And I've been using です in this kind of expression. And here です sounds like I actually have to. And it's important to use です like this because if you don't use です and say 早く帰らないといけません, it sounds like you're just reading a phrase which sounds very strong. It's like this is a fact. And it doesn't sound very nice. But since some people complain about です is like, oh, it's too difficult, I can also give you some examples without using です, which is like, 今日はちょっと早く帰らないとすいません. Because you can just say, 今日はちょっと早く帰らないと instead of 今日はちょっと早く帰らないといけないんです. Because if you stop at と, it implies that といけない. So you can just say 今日は早く帰らないと and with the right tone of voice, like ちょっと今日早く帰らないと, it works perfectly. They also suggested another example which is very colloquial and it's 今日はちょっと早く帰らないとです. It's that I have to go home early today. This is very colloquial, so you would never use this in formal writing. But if you use this, it sounds so natural that everybody will think your Japanese is amazing. And I know there's so many different ways of saying this, and you don't have to memorize everything. This is not a test. This is not Minna Nihongo that requires you to remember the exact phrases and reject all the other completely legitimate answers. So don't worry about memorizing every single phrase in this video. And yet another interesting point that other native speakers made is ですから can come across too strong in this context. Because we sometimes use ですから to mean something like, I've already told you 3 times, why don't you understand? So there's kind of like a frustrating tone here. It's kind of like, 今晩飲みに行きませんか? Do you want to go for a drink tonight? すいません。今日早く帰らなきゃいけないんですよ。飲みに行きましょうよ。What? Let's go for a drink. いや、今日ちょっと早く帰らないといけなくて。いいじゃないですか。No, no, it should be fine. And you're getting frustrated. And you say, いや、ですから、今日早く帰らないといけないんですよ。No, I'm telling you, I really have to go home early. So that kind of energy. And we sometimes use this kind of overly formal expressions to express frustration or like I insist. And you can actually do something like this in English too. For example, if your roommate keeps playing video games at 2 a.m. without headphones, even though you've repeatedly asked them not to do that because it's noisy, you can say something like, could you please use headphones? And here, you're not saying could you please because of your respect to your roommate. It's like your frustration. So intentionally using some formal or very polite language to express frustration isn't really just unique to Japanese. So learning overly formal expressions first and only learning them isn't necessarily a good approach, especially when you have perfectly polite and more common alternatives like なので instead of ですから or なきゃいけません instead of なければなりません. Yes, learning both makes total sense, but only learning the less common, overly formal expressions isn't a good approach. Anyway, we've covered a lot of things, and if you want to acquire natural and practical Japanese, maybe you can join my email group because I have both free and paid lessons where you can acquire Japanese with natural, easy, and properly contextualized examples. So click on the link in the description or on the screen and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta.